Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. I'm here with works that you collect compulsively, that we just can't stop getting our grubby little fingers and our clogged ears on. I mean, really, seriously, works that just haunt our dreams. Well, today we're talking about Brahms' Serenade No. 1. But before we get to that, I have a completely unrelated aside that I just have to talk about because it was so funny. You know, I was going through my shelves here, looking for some show and tell objects for this particular video. I found a couple. Yeah, it's a good thing. And I came across a CD that just grabbed my attention. It's really kind of a fun disc, and it's Ruud Lanyard, the Danish composer, who, was kind of out of his mind. He wrote the opera Antichrist and all that and fixates on it. But he has this piece for chorus and orchestra and soloist called The End of Time. And it has, Antichrist, prelude, at the end of time, towards the end of the world, and finally the catastrophe. It's a cheery piece. It's actually a lot of fun to listen to, but that's not the point. The point is that this is with Rozhdestvensky and friends, the Danish National Radio Symphony Orchestra on Chandos. You may want to hear it. I may talk about it someday. We'll have to see. But the fun thing about it was that the spine, as it sat in my shelf, I'm going through looking for the Brahms First Serenade, running around, and I see this. It says, can you see that? Yes. It says, The End of Time, etc. And then just all of a sudden, I just stopped and said, what etc. could there possibly be after the end of time? Sure, okay, it's just the end of time, etc. Anyway, it just struck me. It just caught me as absolutely hilarious for some reason. And so I wanted to share that with you before we talk about the Brahms First Serenade. But now we are into the Brahms. And, here's the thing. I was never a Brahmsian. I came to Brahms rather late, except for the First Symphony, which was like my mother's favorite piece of the whole world. And that, I used to associate with house cleaning and other things she did while listening to it. I loved the Brahms First, always, from the womb. But the serenades, I didn't even know they existed, and I wasn't really into the other Brahms symphonies so much. And then I thought, well, I saw this thing, and I thought, well, what the hell is that? You mean he wrote like more big symphonic, like orchestral pieces that no one ever plays? Because back in the 70s, when I was collecting these things, they're and first getting to know them, there weren't that many recordings of the serenades. Bernstein did the second, and a few other people had done the first. And I finally got my hands on the First Serenade, and oh, wow, it was so beautiful and so rustic and charming and so colorfully scored compared to the symphonies. Because Brahms' symphonic orchestration is a world apart. He had a definite view of what symphonic orchestration should be. And in the serenades, he was doing something completely different. He was learning how to use the wind section. So there's all kinds of wonderful writing for solo winds, and trumpets get the tune, and things that almost never happen in Brahms symphonies. And I was just charmed. Partly it was also because I had come to it through Beethoven and Dvorak. Dvorak I always adored. And I knew my Dvorak very, very well at a very early age, before I knew Brahms. So the First Serenade was kind of Brahms's most Dvorak-y piece. With its charming clarinet solos and rustic tunes. And I thought, oh, wow, yeah, if only he kept doing this instead of writing those 4 dreary symphonies. Well, actually, I'm exaggerating because they're magnificent symphonies, and I love them to death. But at the time, I'm referring to my pupating state, and I was still in my chrysalis learning about the wonders of classical music. And so I just adored the First Serenade, and I started collecting recordings of the First Serenade as they started becoming available. And so, as is usual with this series, I have my top 5 out of the God knows how many I actually own. After many years of sifting, and I want to emphasize again in this series, these are not necessarily the best. These are the ones that I turn to when I feel like hearing Brahms' Serenade, and which I turn to because of their variety, not because they're necessarily the greatest things in sliced bread, but because because they seem to reveal different facets of the music, which I can select depending on my mood, depending on what I want to hear. So the first one, which is my favorite choice, and my however choice anyway, in the repertoire series, is Bernard Haitink with the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra on Decca, which formerly was Philips. So I did a whole talk about this piece and about this recording of this piece. As usual with Haitink, he seems to be at his best when he's rooting for the underdog, when he's doing music that isn't as popular or that he feels needs perhaps special pleading. And he achieves that wonderful advocacy simply by making the playing as gorgeous as possible, with rational tempos and beautiful balances and gorgeous textures and handling of rhythm that's always lively. And oh my God, it's a gorgeous recording. It's one of the most beautiful recordings of anything I've ever heard. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And that's probably my go-to pick, 7 out of 10 times. But there are many others that I also enjoy. Among them, this one, the Czech Philharmonic with Jiří Bělohlávek on Supraphon, because the Czech Philharmonic is, along with Concertgebouw, one of the great woodwind orchestras. You want to hear their winds. And aside from a horribly creaking chair at the moment of recapitulation, I believe, or somewhere around there where the clarinet comes in, this is a splendid performance. Bělohlávek did the whole Brahms cycle. He did the concertos, and it was rather soggy. And he was a gentle soul, and his music making could be very soft-edged. But here, for some reason, it all just works wonderfully well, partly because the orchestration is more Dvorak-y, possibly. It's more vivid, and so the orchestra just eats it up, and he plays it magnificently, and it's absolutely terrific. Then, after that, my other show and tell object is this one, and this may come as a surprise to some of you. Adrien Bol. Yes, Adrien Bol on EMI. I think it's with the London Phil. It's either London Phil or London Symphony. It's one of those things. It's London Phil, I think, because he did his Brahms cycle with the London Phil. Now, remember, Boult was about 175 years old when he gave up conducting, and he studied under Nikisch, and he was old enough to have hung out with Brahms, and he really knew Brahms. He had the style. It is a shame that his symphony cycle was made so late in his career, and is rather soggy and undisciplined as well. I'm kind of like Bělohlávek, but it's a shame because he really has the style. He was to the manner born, literally, and his performance of the first Serenade is stunningly exciting and beautiful and fresh and unaffected, and it has all of the things that he really does amazingly well when he's on. And so if you haven't heard his recording of the Brahms First Serenade, give it a shot. You will be very, very pleasantly surprised. Number 4, Charles Mackerras, of course, with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra on Telarc. An absolutely lovely, lovely disc that was done in tandem with his recording of the Brahms symphonies, which were made, according to the Meiningen tradition from that typescript, the type thing that we have that I actually have a copy of that talks about in great detail what you should do, movement by movement and phrase by phrase in all of the symphonies. Very, very interesting, and it bespeaks a romantic view of interpretation, with extremes of tempo and lots of gear shifting and adjustments and fulsome phrasing, and it's lovely. And Mackerras plays the symphonies, the serenades, which were not part of that typescript, by the way, or whatever it's called, in the same way. It wasn't part of that discussion, but he plays them in the same sense, and they're wonderful. They're just beautiful, fresh and lively performances. And finally, last but not least, the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra with Gerard Schwarz on Nonesuch. Now, most people probably didn't even know that existed. This was one of those, when Nonesuch was sort of a what's the word, rebel label in the classical music world. They did all kinds of weird things. They licensed stuff. They had all kinds of unusual repertoire, and Gerard Schwarz was working with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, made some beautiful, beautiful recordings. This is the recording that I go to when you really want to hear the chamber origins of the work. Because remember, Brahms conceived of the serenade originally as like an octet or something like that. It was a chamber work, and it's been it's been de-orchestrated and performed that way by like the Linos Ensemble on Capriccio, I think, did it, and some others. So it is in many respects very much a chamber-like work. It exists in that quasi-twilight realm between chamber music and orchestral music, much as, for example, the Mendelssohn Octet and things like that, where you could actually add strings and do things like the Beethoven Septet, things like that. So in a way, it was in that tradition. And Schwarz gives it the most lean, chamber music-like interpretation possible. It's lovely and totally different from everybody else's. Totally different. And it's an interesting reminder of the fact that, it wasn't like the period instrument people who were able to give a fresh view of music that was supposedly very well known. No. It always happened. It happened all the time. Maybe less frequently. It wasn't an institutional different view as it became under the period instrument people, but there were always, interesting and conceptually different views of music by intelligent and creative musicians, and this is certainly one of them. It's a tremendously compelling performance and so different from all of the others. It's just wonderful. And those are my top 5 for the Brahms First Serenade. If you have a top 5 for the Brahms Serenade, or a top 2 or 3 or 4, however many, please let me know. Let me know what they are. I'm very curious to know. That would be interesting because we could all share this information. It's such a lovely work, and really a work that has only come into its own in the past couple of decades. There's nothing record labels like more than major works by very well-known composers that are not well-known. And this was one of those discoveries that people just went for. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.